Hey everyone, thanks for watching. Today I'm going to try to answer a couple of questions. For bird and wildlife photographers, is the Canon R6 an upgrade from the 90D? Does the Canon 90D's 32.5 megapixel sensor produce noticeably sharper images than the R6's 20 megapixel sensor? And I tried to do realistic tests. I used fake birds with real feathers. I shot outside where real birds live, and I shot in the sun, and I shot in the shade. I made sure that each shot was properly exposed using the histograms and the compensation dials, and I used spot metering to get exposure on the birds right. So you'll notice some over and underexposed backgrounds in these images. All of the focal lengths, the f-stops, and the shutter speeds were the same on both cameras. I adjusted ISOs to get my exposure right. But do remember this. The Canon 90D has a crop sensor, so the focal lengths are going to be 1.5 times greater, and the f-stops are going to be higher as well. Okay, these first shots are at about 30 to 40 feet away from the birds. Now I didn't measure exact distance because I don't do that in real-world bird photography anyway, so why start now? In the 90D raw image at 150 millimeters, there is decent detail, but it's not super sharp. After cropping to 16:9, I added contrast and sharpness, and then exported it as a TIFF file to Davinci. It already looks better, and after some grading, this image looks presentable. With the 90D at 600 millimeters, we have a lot more detail, and at 400%, we still have really good detail in the feathers and the fluff on the bird. The graded image cleans up nicely, and it looks much better than the 150 millimeter image did. So let's see how the R6 did under the same conditions. In the 150 millimeter RAW file, the birds are smaller than in the 90D images because of the different sensor sizes. At 400%, things look okay. Not noticeably better or worse than the 90D images. With the 16:9 crop and other adjustments were a little cleaner, but again, it just looks okay. After grading, this image looks presentable. So far, the R6 is not an upgrade for bird photography, and the 90D's 32.5 megapixel sensor is not crushing the R6. And as we should expect, the R6 at 600 millimeters gives us more detail, and it holds up when cropped to 400%, so point for the R6 there. With the 16.9 crop and basic corrections, the image looks even better. And for the grade and edit, I cropped in and added a little zoom, and I think it looks pretty good. Neither of these cameras are significantly outperforming the other so far. Here's another pop quiz. Which of these photos was taken with the 90D and which with the R6? Photo A again with the 90D and photo B with the R6. In a side-by-side comparison of the graded 600 millimeter images, both produced nice detail and sharpness. So far, I think these cameras are in a tie for bird photography. Now for some lucky shots. You know, when the bird lands close by and it stays still. Hardly ever happens, but there you go. On the 90D at about 15 to 20 feet and at 150 millimeters, we get a raw file that looks okay. The bird looks all right, but I'm not liking that sun. And at 400%, we see decent detail, but some of the parts are too bright. With some basic corrections, things look better. Detail is pretty good. And for bright sun bird shots, this is not horrible by any stretch. At 600 millimeters, the sigma on the 90D starts to shine. And I think because the aperture is necessarily higher, that the brightness is dialed back. And now punched in, I'm getting that detail. The luminance levels look very editable. And with basic corrections at 400%, things are looking good. I'm expecting a video-ready image after grading. And I like this graded image of the bird. If this was a shot I was going to use in a YouTube bird video, I'd probably do a lot more work on that background, but the bird itself looks good. Now the R6 at the 15 to 20 feet range in bright sunlight. At 150 millimeters, we look overexposed. The bird is in focus, and I can make out some of the detail, but this exposure is an issue. For the record, the histogram and exposure compensation dials were not indicating this overexposure. With basic corrections, things look only a little better. That red bird looks horrible. And I admit this could be me messing up. But I did discover some exposure issues with both of these cameras, and I'll address those in a few minutes. At 600 millimeters, the shot looks better. The The higher apertures have cut down the light getting to the sensor, and at least I see a chance to edit this image for video. We have good sharp detail with little to no loss when we punch into 400%. The graded image is okay, but that brightness really limited what I could do in post. So let's do a side by side. Of the 150mm images, the 90D looks better. There's no question about it. At 600mm, I was able to save the R6 image, and it may look as good as the 90D image, but I couldn't really add much contrast to the R6 image because it was blowing out. So again, I have to go with the 90D here because I overexposed the R6 images. As for sharpness, I think they are both about the same, which is a point for the R6. So let's discuss these exposure issues. The R6, with its low megapixel count, drinks in light. So you may want to underexpose your images when you're shooting in bright light to protect those highlights, even the highlights that you can't see on the histogram or the exposure compensation dial. On the flip side, the Canon 90D, with its higher megapixel count, needs more light and doesn't do so well in low light. The Sigma lens at 500mm and higher has an f-stop of 6.3, so that does not help the Canon 90D out very much, except when you're in bright full sun situations. So if you get into the shade or you're shooting in a low light time of day, you may have to lower your shutter speeds or raise your ISOs. Of course, that's going to introduce noise and possibly cause blur in your images. Now, you could shoot underexposed with the plan to raise it in post, but that's going to introduce noise. If you shoot underexposed and leave it underexposed, you may have crushed blacks in your shot. And crushed blacks usually don't bode too well when you're trying to brighten and sharpen the eyes of birds. So keep those things in mind. Here's another test. These shots were purposefully and carefully overexposed by 3 stops in camera. In post, the 90D image corrected well and did much better than the R6. With some cropping, the 90D image could possibly be usable. The R6 image, while reading only 3 stops overexposed in camera, looks way more exposed than did the 90D image, and it did not clean up well. So again, I'm getting images that look more exposed than the meters are reading in camera with the R6. The underexposed shots are a little different. Both read 3 stops under in camera, and both corrected fairly well. But there was an advantage here for the 90D in this test. If it were really 3 stops dark outside, we'd have to crank the 90D's ISOs to get proper exposure. So we would probably have images with a lot of noise in camera that would have to be corrected in post. Either way, we would be affecting the sharpness of the 90D image in this low light. So let's talk results here. Is the Canon 90D better for bright sun midday bird photography than the Canon R6? Maybe. But the Canon R6 does really well in bright light. It's just that you and I have to be more careful about how we expose our images. Is the Canon R6 a better camera for low light bird photography than the Canon 90D? Probably. But ask yourself this question. Are you really going to be outside in 3 stops of darkness trying to take pictures? And as we've just seen, the Canon 90D is good for a couple of stops underexposed in post without too much drama. Is the R6 an upgrade to the 90D for bird photographers? If you are strictly into photography, then probably not. If you're like me and you like to take videos while you're out, then I would say the R6 probably is an upgrade. The R6 does have more capabilities when it comes to video, but that is a whole nother topic for a whole nother video. Does the 90D's 32.5 megapixel sensor crush the R6 in its meager 20 megapixels? No. That's an old wives' tale. So who is the winner in this comparison? And that is easy. That is going to be this bad boy right here, the Sigma 150-600. It does well and works wonderfully on both cameras. Well, guys, that's all that I have today. Thank you so much for watching. Go to my channel, check more stuff out like this. Please hit the like button below, and I will see you next time.